Hi all and welcome back to my channel. My name is Davis and on this channel we cover all things tech. Now over the past year or so we've covered a lot of laptops, but not all of them exactly affordable. But not today. Kind of, because today we are talking about the ASUS Vivobook 16X OLED, which is one of the best value creator 16-inch laptops you could possibly find. For example, this example has a pretty amazing set of specs. It's got a 13th generation i9 processor, RTX 4060 graphics, 32 gigabytes of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage, and yet this is regularly available for well under 3,000 Australian dollars. $3,000. That is unbelievable value for something like this. That is less than 2,000 American dollars. I literally spent twice that on my M2 Max MacBook Pro. And I haven't even mentioned the main draw card of this particular device, because unlike my MacBook, this has an absolutely gorgeous OLED display. Yet this bargain basement, ignore that hideous thumbnail, this bargain basement laptop has one of the most gorgeous OLED screens I have ever seen. It is absolutely stunning, but should you buy this laptop? Are there any downsides? Let's find out. If you enjoy tech reviews like this one, be sure to like and subscribe, and also feel free to ask any questions down below if you have any queries about the Vivobook. So this is not the first Vivobook we've looked at. In fact, the first laptop I ever tested on this channel was this computer's little brother, the 14-inch version. And while it didn't thrill me, especially when it didn't have the OLED screen option, I did note that the performance was good for the price and I liked the keyboard. And I also didn't love the look of the hardware. And although this is roughly the same design but larger, this creates a far more positive impression. It's available in a cool silver color, but I've got the indie black color option over here, and it looks very similar in hue actually to Apple's new space black color. However, the difference between that and the MacBook is that this case consists mainly of a polycarbonate enclosure. It does feel kind of similar to aluminium at first, and the quality of the materials and build quality feels relatively reassuring, but it is unfortunately mostly plastic. And that is good because this whole laptop is only 18.9 millimeters in thickness, which makes it only marginally thicker than a 16-inch MacBook Pro, and at 1.8 kilograms it makes it significantly lighter, at 300 grams lighter, and that's something that you can definitely feel when you're lugging this about in your everyday bag. And while overall this computer is quite a classy affair, it's a computer that wouldn't look embarrassing in a boardroom, it still manages to display a certain level of fun, for better or worse. Let's start with the most questionable. Just like on the smaller computer, on the lid there is a plaque. It looks rather nice and subtle until you look a little bit closer, because over here it says go further and beyond. And there's another message saying explore the possibilities. Yikes, that's a little bit cringe, isn't it? But at least it is relatively subtle, and probably nobody can read that unless if they are paying a lot of attention. The rest of the laptop, however, is far nicer. The rest of the lid, for instance, very clean, very minimal. I like it. When you close the lid, there is a nice cutout by the hinge where you can see a couple of indicator lights. They aren't on right now, but they are sometimes. Oh my god, I just realized it says ready to explore on the hinge as well. Yikes. So on the inside, you've got the large 16-inch OLED display with relatively thin bezels. On the top, you've got a 1080p webcam with a sliding lens cap. This is quite a nice mechanism. Some of the sliders do feel a bit cheap on other laptops, but that is nice. Hello, this is the webcam. Isn't it great? Underneath the screen, we've got the logo, which looks okay, and underneath that we do have the same indicator lights that appear when the laptop's closed, and we've also got the speaker grill. Now the speaker grill is hiding a set of Harman Kardon speakers, and while they are not class leading, they still sound really good. And now we get back to the kind of weird stuff again. Okay, so there's the keyboard. They've managed to fit not only a standard full-size keyboard, but also a numpad over here, which is not something that I often like, as it just just sort of makes you type a little bit off center. However, for some reason, it just sort of works here. I still found the keyboard delightful to type on. The keys are well spaced and feel really, really good. And they are backlit as well, which you would expect for the price. And there is also the fingerprint reader / power button. I found it personally to be a little bit unreliable, but at least it is there. What's especially exciting is that we've got an orange escape key. Not sure how much I like that, but at least it's interesting. And we've also got a racing stripe on the enter button. Yay. While these additions are odd, at least they are kind of fun. And underneath all that, we've got the trackpad, which is very large and actually really, really nice to use. It's smooth, it's accurate, and while it is a dive board mechanism, only the bottom corners actually go down, the action feels firm and reassuring. And there's also something called the ASUS style pad on the top right over here. It does give you a few unusual features. We'll get to that later, but overall, not sure how useful an addition it is. And yeah, also, I don't know if they do this just for reviewers, because I did find it quite useful when writing this review. We do have a lot of stickers. For instance, we know it runs on Intel, it's got GeForce RTX graphics, the screen is Pantone validated, and then we've got all the specs over here. This one is beginning to peel already, as you can see. And while these did help tremendously with my laptop review, I honestly don't think that we need to see these sort of stickers on laptops anymore. It's just excessive. On the upside though, the port selection is rather excellent. On the left side, we do have the barrel DC port, which is okay. We've also got an Ethernet port over here. We've got USB-A and a full-size SD card slot. For some reason, manufacturers are starting to install micro SD cards, which confuses me a lot. So it's really good to see a full-size card slot over here. On the other side, we do have an audio jack. We've got another USB-A port. We've got an HDMI 2.1 port and also 2 Thunderbolt 4 USB-Cs. This is basically my perfect selection of ports on a laptop. Maybe I would swap one of the USB-As for another USB-C Thunderbolt, but it is still fantastic. And then on the bottom, I very rarely show the bottom of laptops, but you need to see this one. Are you ready for it? 3, 2, 1. Oh. It's got fluoro orange feet. Who the hell decided to do this? This is like the equivalent of those corporate people who like to wear some fun socks to spice up their personality. It's kind of dumb, but I personally kind of like it at the same time. And while we're down here, we can also see that there's ample cooling. It's got ASUS's ice cool technology, which consists of 2 massive fans, which means that the system can draw up to 150 watts of power and still not throttle down. It's very impressive, the cooling. So now that we've taken a look at the basic hardware, I'd like to draw our attention to quite possibly one of the more interesting features of this laptop, which was the ASUS style pad that we mentioned earlier. And it's basically this little circle thing that sits on your trackpad, and it can sort of replicate the Microsoft Surface dial thing that you see on some Surface products, except on your trackpad. Let me show you how it works. To activate it, all you do is you swipe down on this section of the touchpad, and this can turn it on or off. And then when it activates, you can see that the dial lights up over here. And then you can tap on it to access it, all the different controls. And then you tap on it again to select which one you want. And then you can turn it up and down accordingly. So by default on the main home screen, you've only got access to your system volume and your system brightness. You can add a few more, but I didn't find anything particularly exciting. It's a little bit superfluous here, but this feature does become a little bit more cool because they've teamed up with various developers like Adobe and Microsoft to integrate it into their suites. For example, let's open Photoshop. And we can see this is one of my old thumbnails. I look very snazzy over here. And let's see what I can do. We just tap over here and we can see we can select from our brush groups. We've got our layer zoom in and out. We've got undo history and also cycle through documents. For example, let's go through brush group. We can change our brush size. And as you can see there, we can make our brush bigger and smaller. I'm honestly not sure about the utility of this, but if you can somehow incorporate this into your workflow, then I guess that's cool. We can zoom in and out like so. It's a little bit laggy, as you can see. But the thing is, most of these features can just be replicated with a keyboard shortcut. God. Or just literally zoom using multi-touch gestures. This reminds me of the old trackpads that we used to have on Windows laptops with scroll bars on the side. I'm not sure if it's that useful an idea, but you know, it's kind of cool. And let's look at what you can do in Premiere Pro. So I've just got a random project lined up over here. I can tap on it. I can change the time axis adjustment. So that's literally just scrolling on the timeline. Not that useful maybe, but kind of interesting. We can zoom in and out on the timeline. Just note over here that there's far less lag than we saw in Photoshop, which is good. And we can also change the height of the audio tracks. Again, not sure how useful that is, but it is there. They also cited the example of PowerPoint. So we've got some fonts over here. Fantastic, let's select that. We can tap and change the font size. Fascinating stuff. And we can change volume up and down on whatever video you might have playing. So this feature is quite interesting, but essentially not that useful. If this was on a separate panel, maybe like to the side of the trackpad, this could be fractionally more useful. But again, most of these features are more easily done the traditional way. Okay, so now that we know that the hardware is good, plus and minus a few gimmicky features, I think that we should probably move on now to quite possibly the highlight of this computer, something that I would quite possibly spend thousands of dollars for, and it is the display. It is quite possibly the most beautiful display I have ever seen on a laptop. It's a 16-inch, 16 by 10 aspect ratio, 3.2K OLED panel that supports HDR and refreshes at 120 Hz. Every single possible spec you could want on a laptop display, this seems to have. Not only is it extremely sharp with its 3200 by 2000 resolution, but I love the slightly taller aspect ratio. I tested a MSI Mercedes laptop recently with a very similar display, but that one, although it was a more expensive computer, it only refreshed at 60 Hz instead of 120 over here. As with all OLEDs, you can see that this is extremely colorful. It covers 100% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, and also it's Pantone validated, so it means that I would have no issue color grading with this particular panel. On a side note though, while the whites can look weird on some OLED displays, this one actually looks relatively good. There's no weird blue or yellow hues unless if you were looking at it from an angle. And it's also decently bright for an OLED display at 600 nits. So while it's not the brightest display on the market, especially for HDR work, 600 is still pretty good for a laptop OLED display. However, there is a little problem with it. It is very reflective. While most modern displays have some sort of anti-reflective coating, I don't think this one does. So it literally reflects everything that you could possibly see, and it makes working outside or even in a decently lit room more difficult than it has to be. At one point, I knew that the screen was too bright for my eyes, but I still had to crank the brightness up just to combat the reflections. So despite the reflections, I think the display is still very good. Okay, so we like the design and we like the screen, but what else do we like? The performance. This computer is an absolute beast. I honestly can't believe how much performance you can get at this price. And it's not a crazy, cheaply made gaming laptop either, which makes it all the more impressive. The processor is a very impressive Intel Core i9-13080HX, and that's a 24-core processor, and it can boost up to a whopping 5.6 GHz and can consume up to 105 watts of power. And the results are very impressive. Let's take a look at the Geekbench, for instance. So So single core Geekbench on power is 2724 and multi-core of 15779. That is more than my binned M2 Max MacBook Pro that I paid almost $6,000 for last year. The MacBook Pro's multi-core was just 14,473, and this score makes it actually only marginally slower than the M3 Max MacBook Pro that again costs twice as much as this computer. Like with most PC laptops though, unfortunately it can't sustain this level of performance when on battery power, as soon as you remove the power, it does become significantly less performative. As we can see over here, while it still gets 2407 single core, the multi-score drops down to just 4 figures at 9,659, which is still fairly good, but not overly impressive for a computer this large. However, if you thought that the processing performance was good, wait till you see the graphics. It got a graphics OpenCL score of 91,055 on power. That is significantly more than even the binned M3 Max MacBook Pro, which got 76,000 on the same test. But again, this does drop significantly when you put it on battery. And significant, I mean it, because it drops down to under 30,000. So if you are the sort of person who wants to game or wants to edit video on battery power, perhaps this is not the computer for you. So these figures sound very impressive, and what it basically means is that you can run whatever creative programs you want, but only when you are connected to mains power. So for instance, this Adobe Premiere Pro project ran really smoothly when it was plugged into power, but now it's not plugged into power. So as you can see, there is definitely a little bit of lag when I make adjustments to the clip, and while it is possible to edit like this, it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. And if you're wondering about gaming performance, so as we can see, when playing normally, Forza Motorsport at these particular settings, 1200p high, it gets roughly 50 to 60 frames a second, but as soon as you take out the mains power and it's running on battery, it goes down to around 30 frames. So that's the sort of level of performance difference that you get. Overall, performance is absolutely insane for the price, but unfortunately, that comes at a cost. And I'm sure that you can guess what that is. And yes, it is battery life. We live in a world where many laptops can get 10 hours of normal use without much stress. For example, on my M2 Max MacBook Pro 16, I regularly edit videos on battery power for 6-7 hours maybe at a time and not have any issues at all. And if I run out, I can just charge it with an external battery and it just runs off that. Brilliant. With this though, unfortunately, that is not an option. When I'm babying this thing in power saving mode, I can get around 5 hours of battery on this, maybe 6 if I really stretch it. If I'm not being careful though, and when I'm using a laptop, I just really don't want to think about saving battery power. If I've got a few things running in the background, quite a few open tabs, battery life does reduce to around 3 hours. And when I'm video editing, let's have a look at what I am getting. This is more than I was expecting. It says 2.5 hours with 74% left. But from my experience, when I'm really video editing, it gives me around 90 minutes. And that's not really great, but at least with a 240 watt charger, which is surprisingly compact for something this powerful, you can charge this 90 watt hour battery in just half an hour according to ASUS. So you definitely don't want to be away from your power adapter with this. And also you can't really charge this with a normal USB-C power bank either. So in conclusion, should you get the ASUS Vivobook 16X OLED? Well, I believe that if we ignore battery life, this is quite possibly one of the most impressive laptops you can get, especially at this bargain basement price. It's got an incredible screen, really decent performance. The build quality, while mostly plastic, feels pretty good. The speakers are good, the keyboard and trackpad are good. It is literally only battery life that is poor, and also performance on battery. If you're looking for a desktop replacement laptop, then I'd say that this is an unbelievable choice. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, and remember that you can comment below if you've got any questions as well. And on that note, toodaloo.